In this presentation, we will review the planning, implementation and outcomes of a UDL collaboration carried out by myself and a colleague and fellow teacher in my centre, completed in a bid to foster her UDL Spark and create more inclusive, diverse and effective learning environments for both her and her students. The presentation will aim to identify the role of UDL in my current context, outline my UDL collaboration, discuss the outcomes of the collaboration, and consider future steps. So what is the significance of UDL in the FET sector? Well, presently, SOLAS's Future FET Strategy 2020 to 2024 highlights inclusion as one of 3 strategic priorities and lists embedding inclusive practices as a key element of this, which is an integral part of the development within the sector. It has been said that the concept of universal design for learning is key to inclusion because it increases access to equal learning opportunities within the mainstream teaching environment, and that by using the UDL framework, educators can accept learner variability as a strength to be leveraged, not a challenge to be overcome. Quirk and McCarthy tell us that universal design for learning is a set of principles and guidelines that aim to develop expert learners by using a variety of teaching methods to lower barriers to learning and give all learners equal opportunities to succeed. This is clearly demonstrated in the continuum of support, or the UDL pyramid, which shows us that by considering and designing to include the needs of many, we can potentially reduce demands and free up what tend to be very stretched resources for those few who may still need them. So how did I find my UDL collaboration candidate? Well, alongside my current teaching role, I am also one of City of Dublin ETB's Technology Enhanced Learning Mentor Scheme, TELM's Mentors. This mentoring programme requires us to work with colleagues in supporting them to embed technological and pedagogical approaches to their teaching practice, something similar to the requirements of this project. It requires us to conduct needs analysis and reaching out to recruit interest from our peers, a process I had begun in September, and one that isn't without its challenges. As many colleagues are already familiar with UDL, the TELMS programme doesn't always get great buy-in, because sometimes it is viewed as something for online learning, as opposed to something that we should be embedding in our day-to-day practice. However, during an initial TELMS meeting with one of my mentees, we discovered that she too was studying in the area of equality, diversity and inclusion, and needed to complete a redesign activity of her own. Having previously completed the AHEAD digital badge in UDL, she, like me, when faced with completing another redesign, was struggling to see how to differentiate between her previous work from what she was required to do now. In an effort to work smarter and not harder over an informal cup of coffee, we decided to collaborate on both. So what next? Well, once I had established who I was going to be working with for the collaboration, I set about planning how I would facilitate the coaching sessions to ensure we were both getting the best from each step in the process. I identified a number of questions that needed to be answered in the initial consultation, including: who had they in mind for the collaboration? What did they already know about universal design for learning, and what approaches or methods had they used in the past? And did they work? What did they want to achieve, and how did they think this could be done? And possibly most importantly, why? Having considered a number of coaching templates, such as the GROW and the FUEL models, I decided upon the OSCAR coaching model, as it seemed to be the best fit in this circumstance. This 5-step model looked at determining the outcome and goals of a session, clarifying the individual's current situation and feelings, generating choices and considering the consequences, determining the next immediate steps to be taken, and developing a plan for return and review of the process. Using the OSCAR framework to guide us, we identified the following as our starting points and overall objectives. Our outcome would be to create opportunities for students to become more autonomous learners. The situation was that previous redesign activities had failed to elicit the desired response from students, even when multiple options had been provided. Choices. We discussed several scenarios at length before deciding on a best course of action. Action. We identified steps with clear objectives for all involved, including the learners. And review. We agreed upon a schedule of implementation and review that seemed to fit with the time frame we had. Following the initial consultation, I considered the outcomes, situation and objectives as it was outlined by my mentee, and I identified that in order to address the general concern she had, the following may be the simplest and most direct method. 1. To create a change to an assessment, providing a +1 option for engagement. 2. To change the teaching methodologies, providing a +1 option for representation. Or 3. To build autonomy in the learner by using a combination of both of the above. As the main goal of my UDL collaborator was to increase student autonomy, we focused in on the action and expression principle. In particular, focusing on the physical action checkpoints of varying the methods for response and navigation and optimizing access to tools and assistive technologies, as previous attempts at this from my coachee had proved to be somewhat fruitless, with little to no uptake of the alternative evidence formats provided being used, at times possibly to the detriment of the learner. And although we focused in on this one checkpoint, we were acutely aware in our planning that in doing so we either would or should hit other checkpoints along the way, all of which should enrich the learning journey for those involved. At subsequent meetings, we decided upon the group that we would use to implement the design. This group was chosen as they were familiar to both of us. They were part of a part-time Back to Education initiative class, so therefore those returning to education who already had external pressures upon them. There were both diagnosed and undiagnosed learning difficulties within the group, and digital literacy and divide issues. Overall, the group had a poor learning persona based on their previous educational experiences. So what was the change? We decided to redesign an upcoming 50% skills demonstration assessment activity. This skills demonstration is outlined as a series of role-play activities by QQI, and as such, video evidence is usually submitted. These videos traditionally were completed as in-class recorded sessions, which placed a lot of pressure on both teacher and learner in various ways, such as time constraints with learners having to be there for the recorded sessions and digital skills. So what would we do to support this change? Well, as the main goal was to develop more self-directed autonomous learners and provide options for physical action, we considered what further actions needed to be taken to support the change and ensure a better uptake from learners than previous attempts had gotten. So we planned some sessions and did some team teaching on topics to lay the foundations for the redesign, and integrated one tool to facilitate a +1 approach to their assessment, scaffolded by in-class and teacher use to improve engagement. As by providing such alternatives, we can reduce media-specific barriers to expression among learners and also increase the opportunities for all learners to develop a wider range of expression in a media-rich world. But UDL isn't the only model we considered as part of these redesign activities. While developing the student tasks, we also referred to the ADDIE model of instructional design to ensure that each task was doing exactly what we needed it to, and to Gilly Salmon's 5-step scaffolding framework to ensure we were providing adequate support along the way. As when students share the responsibility of teaching and learning through scaffolds that require them to move beyond their current skill and knowledge levels, through this interaction, students are able to take ownership of the learning event. So how were these actions implemented? Firstly, in-class and flipped classroom activities were designed around the skills which we felt needed to be developed for this redesign to be successful, using the chosen tool, Flipgrid. Secondly, mini-class recordings on topics related to the overall task were created by the teacher using Flipgrid and made available to the learners to engage with when and how they chose to through Moodle the Centre's virtual learning environment. These recordings also provided learners with a realistic and relevant example of what Flipgrid could be used to create. Once these activities were completed, they were delivered to the students in a phased manner, working from totally in-class activities and demonstrations to that of self-directed flipped classroom style activities, where students could begin to learn and engage autonomously with the material, but in a safe way, without fear of losing marks, a practice run of sorts. Finally, after all the scaffolding activities had been successfully carried out, students were introduced to the skills demonstration assessment task, including the +1 of how to present their materials and a link to Flipgrid, the tool they had been working on, should they choose to use one of its functions. So what were the outcomes of the collaboration? To date, the redesign seems to have been a success. My UDL collaborator and partner has seen a dramatic increase in the amount of students choosing to use various options provided for them in the task, of which 18 have been through Flipgrid, the +1 tool scaffolded and supported through this redesign, much higher than in any other attempt she has previously made. However, we are not finished just yet. There is still one more session from the plan to go, which had to be rescheduled due to unforeseen circumstances. This session will focus on obtaining feedback from the students on how they felt the process went. After which, we will complete our own review as part of our final plan from the Oscar framework and consider if the process was successful, and if so, how do we plan to continue. So what was my role in this collaboration? Well, having reflected upon the process, I would say that I had two main roles in the collaboration. One, to support the teacher and learner in making a +1 change. And two, to collaborate on building teacher and learner confidence using a new digital tool. And finally, where will we go from here? Well, as said previously, there is definitely more work to be done. In particular, seeking feedback from the learners involved. Both myself and my collaborator wish to discuss further UDL redesigns that could be completed individually or together. I would like to work in collaboration with other UDL-minded colleagues within my centre, and possibly even then organisationally, with the development of a community of practice. And finally, perhaps looking further than I have before into the potential of using other programmes like TALMS to support and develop universal design for learning among our staff. Thank you.